The music hadn't stopped yet when the first phone in the room began to buzz. No one noticed. Not yet. They were too busy watching Vincent Moretti's hand, still outstretched, still holding a fountain pen, go completely still. The ballroom inside Moretti Manor glittered the way it always did, for occasions meant to be remembered. Chandeliers dripped gold light across 200 faces. Senators, shipping magnates, judges who owed their appointments to the names stitched into the napkins. Every one of them believed they had come to witness something dignified. A quiet, tasteful ending. The kind of divorce that made headlines for its grace instead of its scandal. Vincent hadn't looked up from the paper in front of him. He rarely did when the outcome no longer interested him. He signed the final line of the agreement with the same steady hand he used to sign shipping contracts worth more than most of the guests would earn in a lifetime. Then he placed the fountain pen beside the folder, capped it, and slid the divorce papers across the small linen-covered table set up for exactly this purpose. "You'll be provided for," he said. That was always the arrangement. Not "I'm sorry." Not "we tried." Just terms. Delivered the way he closed every deal that mattered less to him than this one clearly didn't. Everyone in that room expected Lily Carter to lower her eyes the way she always did. Small, grateful, invisible. The housemaid who had somehow become Mrs. Moretti on paper 6 years ago and nothing more since. The woman the servants adored and the guests forgot the moment she left a room. Instead, her hand moved to the curve of her stomach, barely hidden beneath the pale blue silk of her gown. She lifted her chin, looked directly at him. "I'm pregnant, Vincent." The papers left his hand before he decided to drop them. They didn't fall so much as escape, drifting once through the golden light before landing face up on the marble. His own signature staring back at the ceiling. Somewhere near the flower arrangements, a woman's hand flew to her mouth. A senator set his glass down without appearing to notice he'd done it. The string quartet in the corner let their bows go still mid-measure, as though the music itself understood there would be no finishing this song tonight. Vincent Moretti, the man 3 governors called before making decisions, the man whose silence alone had ended careers, stood frozen beneath his own wedding photographs, unable to speak. The whispers moved through the crowd like static before a storm. Whose child is it? Did she know before tonight? Why didn't he? And why, for the first time anyone could remember, does the most controlled man in the empire look like the one about to fall apart? No one in that ballroom knew that 6 years earlier, Vincent's father had sat across from a 19-year-old maid named Lily Carter and quietly decided she was the only thing capable of saving his son from becoming exactly the kind of man this room feared. No one knew about the locked drawer in the old man's study, or the journal inside it, or the single underlined sentence that had waited years to matter. No one knew that 3 months ago during the 2 days Vincent and Lily spent hiding together in an isolated mountain estate after an attack, no one outside his inner circle was ever told about. Something had happened between them that neither had planned for and neither had spoken of since. They only knew what they had seen tonight. The coldest man in New York, undone by 4 whispered words, standing over the wreckage of a paper that was supposed to set them both free. Vincent knelt, not to retrieve the contract. He walked around the small table, past the fountain pen still rolling gently against the linen, and lowered himself in front of her the way no one in that room had ever seen him lower himself for anyone. He pressed his palm flat against the place where her hand still rested, as if he needed to feel it was real before he allowed himself to believe it. "Look at me," he said quietly, and for once his voice had nothing composed left in it. "Is it mine?" Lily's eyes filled. She didn't answer with words. She simply held his gaze until the question answered itself. Across the room, his family's longtime physician, Dr. Holloway, stepped forward with a folder of his own, quietly, the way he did everything. He didn't hand it to Vincent yet. He only caught his eye, and the smallest shake of his head told Vincent everything he needed to know before the papers ever reached him. She hadn't come for money. She'd known for 3 months, and she hadn't asked for a single dollar. The silence that followed no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the first minute of something none of them, least of all Vincent Moretti, had seen coming. He rose slowly, one hand still resting against her, and turned toward the room full of people who had come expecting a divorce. "Burn the papers," he said. No one moved. All of them, he said again, quieter this time and somehow more absolute than anything he had said all night. There will be no divorce. Somewhere near the back of the room, a man in an expensive gray suit lifted his phone just far enough to catch the moment on camera, smiling in a way no one else noticed, because everyone else was still watching Vincent Moretti kneel. His name was Ricardo, Vincent's cousin, a man who had spent the last 3 months paying hospital clerks for exactly this kind of information, and who understood, better than anyone else in that glittering room, that an unborn Moretti heir was no longer a private matter. It had just become the single most valuable thing in the entire empire. Vincent just dropped the divorce papers for the woman everyone called just the maid. But someone in that room already knows this baby is worth more than the entire Moretti empire, and he's smiling. Comment a year if you think Ricardo already has a plan. Follow for Chapter 2. The empire is about to go to war over a baby that hasn't even been born yet. By morning, the story had already outgrown the ballroom that made it. Moretti headquarters had never opened its doors at 6 a.m. before, not for anyone. By 7, the executive floor was full. By 8, 3 separate legal teams were arguing in 3 separate conference rooms about a divorce that technically no longer existed, and a marriage that suddenly meant more than any merger the company had closed in a decade. He can't simply cancel it, one attorney insisted, pacing beside a wall of untouched, cooling coffee. There were terms, signatures, witnesses. There were, his colleague said quietly, until he told 200 guests to burn them. No one had an answer for that. Upstairs, behind a door only 4 people in the company could open without knocking, the family elders had already convened an emergency council. Uncle Salvatore, Aunt Teresa, 2 cousins twice removed who rarely appeared except when money or bloodline was involved, which meant this morning they had both arrived before dawn. A housemaid, Salvatore said, carrying the next Moretti heir. She is not a housemaid, Vincent said. She is my wife. She has been your wife on paper for 6 years, and last night you knelt in front of 200 witnesses like a man half his age. Do you understand what you've done to this family's image? Vincent didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. I understand exactly what I've done. I've told the truth in a room full of people who profit from lies. Salvatore opened his mouth to argue further, then closed it. No one in that room had ever won an argument with Vincent by raising the volume of their objection. They only won, occasionally, by outlasting his patience. And this morning, everyone could see, his patience wasn't the thing running short. 3 floors below, in an office with a view of the harbor his family had quietly controlled for 2 generations, Ricardo Moretti poured himself a cup of coffee and smiled at nothing in particular. He had known about the pregnancy for 4 months. Not from Lily, not from Vincent. From a nurse at Bellevue Memorial who had been depositing an extra $2,000 into an offshore account every month since the day she confirmed the test result, and from a hospital administrator who had quietly rerouted one patient file so it never appeared in the system Vincent's security team monitored. Ricardo hadn't wanted the divorce to happen. He'd wanted something far more useful, the announcement. The moment the entire family, the entire empire learned all at once that there was an heir growing who hadn't yet drawn a single breath, and would therefore be the easiest Moretti in history to remove from the equation, if it came to that. He had waited 4 months for last night. Now, he only had to wait for the right moment to strike. While the executives argued and the elders debated, Vincent found Lily exactly where he expected to. In the East Wing, the smallest, plainest room in the entire estate. The one she'd occupied since before their marriage had a certificate to prove it. You'll move to the West residence, he told her. Today. It has its own security detail, reinforced windows, a private entrance the family doesn't use. No. He hadn't expected that answer. Vincent Moretti rarely did. Lily, I didn't ask for guards, Vincent. I didn't ask for wings of the house or security details or any of this. She wrapped her arms around herself and, for the first time since the ballroom, her composure cracked at the edges. I asked for nothing. I wanted peace. That's all I ever wanted. Vincent studied her for a long moment, the way he studied contracts before deciding whether a clause could be trusted. Then his eyes dropped, almost without permission, to her hand. The ring on her finger was the same one he'd given her the day of their wedding. Plain gold, inexpensive, the kind of ring a man buys when the marriage isn't meant to matter. He'd removed his own years ago, tossed into a drawer he never opened. She had never taken hers off. He didn't say anything about it. But something in his chest shifted, quietly. The way a foundation settles before anyone notices the building has changed shape. That night, long after the estate had gone quiet, Vincent sat alone in his study reviewing bank statements he should have looked at years ago. Every month, without exception, he had transferred a significant allowance into an account under Lily's name. He had assumed, the way a busy man assumes things about people he doesn't look at closely, that she spent it the way anyone would. She hadn't spent a single dollar. Every transfer redirected within days: an orphanage in Queens, a children's hospital wing, 3 widows of men who had died protecting his shipping routes. Not one payment traced back to herself. Vincent sat with that for a long time before he opened the second drawer of his desk, the one that held documents older than either of them. The Moretti family constitution, drafted 3 generations ago, had one clause he hadn't read since he was a boy, memorizing it under his father's watch. He found it now, near the bottom of the 4th page, in language stiff with age, but impossible to misread. The first legitimate child born to the reigning head of the family shall be recognized without contest or delay as the rightful heir to the Moretti estate and enterprise, regardless of the circumstances of their conception or the status of their mother at the time of the marriage. Vincent read it twice. His child, Lily's child, was no longer simply his. By blood, by law, by a document older than the empire itself, the baby growing beneath his wife's heart had just become worth more than anything the Moretti family had ever owned. And somewhere across the city, Riccardo Moretti already knew it too. Vincent didn't sleep that night. He read. He'd asked his head of security for something simple, a file on his own wife, 6 years of records that had somehow never once crossed his desk. By 2 in the morning, the file had grown into 3, then 5, then a stack thick enough that his assistant had quietly refilled his coffee twice unasked. The first folder held medical records that weren't Lily's. They belonged to Marcus Delgado, a retired security guard who'd taken a bullet meant for Vincent's father 12 years earlier and walked with a limp ever since. His surgery bills, 3 of them, over 4 years, had been paid in full by an anonymous donor routed through a small trust Vincent had never heard of. The trust had one authorized signature: Lily Carter. The second folder was an orphanage in Queens. 12 children, a building that had needed a new roof for years, funded quietly, monthly, without a single press release or thank you dinner. The third was wheelchairs, 6 of them for employees injured on Moretti loading docks. Men whose names Vincent recognized only because he'd once signed their termination paperwork when they could no longer work. The fourth was widows. 4 women, husbands lost protecting shipments that mattered more to Vincent than he'd ever admitted, each one receiving a monthly deposit that had never once been late in 4 years. Vincent sat back in his chair. He had built an empire on knowing everything, and somehow he had known nothing about the woman sleeping 2 hallways away. He pulled the 5th folder toward him almost reluctantly. Surveillance reports. Years of them. Routine security footage summaries his team compiled and archived without him ever requesting a single page. He hadn't asked for this one. His assistant had included it anyway with a note. "You should see this, sir." Every report contained her name. 3014 A. Meslet. L. Carter observed assisting kitchen staff during service failure. L. Carter observed cleaning staff quarters, 3rd floor, unassigned task. L. Carter observed comforting a child during storm, East Wing, 11:40 p.m. L. Carter observed teaching English to ground staff, Tuesday sessions, ongoing 18 months. Page after page, year after year. A woman doing work no one had assigned her, in rooms no one thought to look. For people who had long since stopped being surprised by her kindness because they'd simply grown used to it. Vincent closed the folder and pressed his palm against his eyes. Everyone in his empire had known Lily Carter. He was the only one who hadn't. By 9 the next morning, Riccardo made his move. The family council convened without warning, summoned by an emergency notice bearing Riccardo's careful, concerned signature. When Vincent arrived, 6 elders were already seated around the long table, and a screen at the far end displayed a paused frame of grainy security footage. "I didn't want to believe it," Riccardo said, voice heavy with practiced regret. "But someone needed to bring this forward." He pressed play. The footage showed Lily unmistakably seated at a terminal in the estate's private records office, transferring files onto an external drive. Timestamp in the corner 2 nights ago, 1:47 a.m. The room turned toward Vincent. Confidential shipping manifests, Ricardo continued. Routes, security schedules, in the hands of a woman we know almost nothing about, at a time when her pregnancy has just made her the single most protected person in this family. Salvatore's jaw tightened. Even Aunt Teresa looked shaken. Vincent said nothing. He looked at Lily instead. She wasn't frightened. She was studying the screen with the calm, focused attention of someone solving a puzzle rather than someone caught in a trap. "Play it again," she said. "From the beginning." Ricardo hesitated, then obliged, clearly enjoying himself. Lily watched in silence, then pointed to the corner of the frame. "That timestamp says 1:47 a.m. Tuesday." "Yes," Ricardo said. "That's the point. The estate's backup security server logs a full system diagnostic every night at 1:45 a.m. It takes exactly 6 minutes and freezes every camera feed on the property during that window. A maintenance protocol installed after the assassination attempt. Vincent's father insisted on it personally." She looked around the table. "Ask your security director. There is no footage from any camera on this estate between 1:45 and 1051 a.m. Not this Tuesday. Not any Tuesday in 6 years." Silence. Vincent, head of security, seated quietly near the door, went pale and nodded once, barely audible. She's right. That footage shouldn't exist." "Which means," Lily continued, calm and unhurried, "whoever created this recording didn't know about a protocol installed before they ever set foot in this family. They built something convincing. They just didn't build it accurately." The room turned, slowly, from Lily to Ricardo. Ricardo's smile hadn't moved, but something behind his eyes had gone very still. "A clerical error, perhaps," he offered. "I'll have my source reviewed." "Do that," Vincent said quietly, and for the first time since the meeting began, everyone in the room heard exactly what was underneath his calm. The council dissolved within minutes. Elders murmuring apologies to a woman none of them had thought to question before that morning. Vincent watched Lily gather her things without a trace of triumph on her face, as though proving her own innocence to a room full of strangers was simply one more quiet task in a day full of them. He found himself, once again, understanding almost nothing about her. That night, alone in his father's old study, Vincent finally opened the drawer he'd avoided for years. The one holding his father's private journal, untouched since the funeral. He turned the pages slowly, searching for nothing in particular, until one line stopped him completely. Underlined so many times the ink had worn a groove into the paper. "Only Lily Carter can save my son from becoming the man I fear." Vincent read it 3 times before realizing he'd been holding his breath. Vincent turned the journal's pages slowly. The careful way a man handles something he suspects might change everything he believes about his own life. His father's handwriting grew shakier toward the later entries, but the early ones, from nearly 7 years earlier, were sharp and deliberate. The writing of a man who had already decided something and needed to record why. March 14th. Watched her again today, near the old rail yard. 3rd time this month. She has nothing. A coat too thin for the weather. Shoes that should have been replaced a year ago. And still she feeds them. 3 children. None of them hers, none of them anyone's as far as I can tell. She gave them the sandwich she should have eaten herself. Vincent read on. I asked around. Her name is Lily Carter. 19. No family of her own. Aged out of the system with nothing but a suitcase and whatever kindness she'd learned somewhere. No one bothered to teach her. She works 2 jobs and still finds time to sit with children the city forgot. I have built an empire on being feared. My son will inherit that fear, and I am beginning to understand it will be the only thing I ever give him. The final entry on the subject, dated months later, was the one already burned into Vincent's memory. Only Lily Carter can save my son from becoming the man I fear. Beneath it, in smaller writing, almost an afterthought. Not for the company, not for the bloodline. He has power enough for 10 lifetimes. What he does not have, what I failed to give him, is a single reason to be gentle with it. If she will have him, arrange it. Protect her from ever knowing the reason. Vincent sat with the journal open in his lap for a long time. His father hadn't chosen Lily to protect the empire. He'd chosen her to protect his son from himself, and hidden that truth so completely that even Vincent, who prided himself on missing nothing, had spent 6 years believing his marriage was nothing more than a strategic arrangement neither of them had asked for. It wasn't politics. It was the only apology his father had known how to give. While Vincent sat with his father's ghost, Ricardo was busy with a living. Over 3 days, he met quietly with 4 Moretti captains, men who controlled the docks, the freight routes, the private security contracts that kept the empire's less legitimate business running smoothly. Each meeting followed the same pattern: expensive wine, careful flattery, and a single seed of doubt planted somewhere in the conversation. He knelt, Ricardo told one captain, shaking his head sorrowfully, in front of 200 witnesses. For a housemaid, he's protecting his family, the captain said. Is he? Or is he protecting the woman who's made him too soft to protect the rest of us? By the end of the week, whispers had reached every level of the organization. Some captains laughed the rumors off. Others didn't laugh at all. A few began quiet conversations of their own, the kind that started with complaints about leadership and ended, if left unchecked, somewhere far more dangerous. Lily heard fragments of it herself, passing a doorway one evening where 2 junior captains spoke a little too loudly, assuming the halls were empty. She didn't run to Vincent. She didn't hide in her room the way the old version of herself might have. Instead, she found him in his study that night and said something that surprised him more than anything in his father's journal had. You should meet with the Castellano and Rinaldi families this week, before Ricardo does it for you. Vincent looked up. Those families haven't spoken to us directly in 3 years. Because you've let Ricardo speak for you instead. He's telling them you're weak. The only way to prove otherwise isn't with threats. It's by sitting across from them yourself, as a man secure enough not to need this family's fear to hold his position. Vincent studied her for a long moment. It was exactly the counsel his father would have given. Quiet, patient, aimed at strength through steadiness rather than force. You've been listening to more than servants' gossip, he said. I've been listening my whole life, she said simply. No one ever thought I mattered enough to stop talking in front of me. For the first time since their marriage began, Vincent found himself looking at his wife the way he looked at the few advisors he actually trusted, not as an obligation he'd inherited, but as someone whose judgment he wanted in the room. He arranged the meeting with the Castellano family for the following Tuesday. He never got the chance to have it. The convoy left the estate at 7 that evening. 3 armored vehicles, a route planned days in advance. Security details rotated the way protocol demanded whenever family traveled. Lily was meant to be in the second car, en route to a prenatal appointment. Vincent had insisted on escorting personally before a last-minute council matter pulled him away. She left 20 minutes late. A small delay. Nothing that should have mattered. The explosion tore through the second vehicle 4 miles from the estate, precisely where the convoy slowed for the bridge crossing, precisely where someone would have needed to know the exact route, the exact timing, the exact vehicle, to place a device with that kind of accuracy. Vincent's phone rang before the smoke had cleared, before he'd even reached the window overlooking the drive. Lily wasn't in the car. She'd been running late, held up by something small enough no one would ever call it fate. But someone outside his inner circle had known exactly where she would have been, down to the minute. There was a traitor inside the empire, and whoever it was had just tried to kill his wife and his unborn child. Someone inside Vincent's own empire just tried to kill his pregnant wife, and he has no idea who yet. Comment traitor if you already suspect who it is. Follow now. Chapter 5 is where Vincent stops trusting anyone and starts hunting. The explosion changed everything Vincent thought he understood about how to protect his family. By the next dawn, the attacks had multiplied. A fire at the private clinic where Lily's prenatal records were kept, small enough to look accidental, thorough enough to destroy every physical file in the building. A break-in at the secondary safe house 2 hours upstate, the one only 6 people knew existed. A convoy route to the coastal estate compromised so precisely that Vincent's security chief called it impossible 3 times before finally admitting someone inside the organization had to be feeding the information out. Hospitals, safe houses, transportation. Every angle Ricardo could reach, he was reaching. Whoever this is, the security chief said, laying maps across Vincent's desk. They know our protocols better than half our own captains. Then we stop trusting protocols, Vincent said, and start trusting almost no one. He canceled every standing security arrangement that morning. Routes, schedules, personnel rotations, anything a traitor might have memorized over months of careful, patient observation. Whoever had leaked Lily's convoy route hadn't guessed. They had known, with the kind of precision that only came from someone trusted enough to be told the plan in advance. He made one decision that morning that his advisors argued against for nearly an hour. He would escort Lily himself, not send a detail, not delegate to men whose loyalty he could no longer verify with certainty. Himself, at every appointment, every transfer, every moment she left the estate. You run an entire empire, Salvatore said. You cannot personally chauffeur your own wife to doctor's appointments. I can, Vincent said, and I will, until I know which of my own people tried to kill her. 3 days later at a private clinic on the edge of the city, one Vincent had chosen himself, told to no one but the 2 guards driving them. 2 vehicles boxed in their car at a red light with a precision that told Vincent immediately this hadn't been improvised. Someone had studied their timing for days, waiting for the right intersection. Down, he said, already moving. He didn't wait to see how many men climbed out of the second vehicle. He pulled Lily across the seat and put his own body between her and the window as the first shots hit the reinforced glass. 3 sharp cracks that spiderwebbed the pane without breaking through. She felt his weight settle over her, deliberate and absolute. His arm locked around her shoulders, his other hand pressed flat against her stomach, as though he could shield the child from gunfire through sheer force of will. The exchange lasted less than 40 seconds. His driver returned fire through the partition window. The second guard forced the car through a gap in traffic that shouldn't have existed and somehow did. By the time they reached the estate's private entrance, Lily's hands hadn't stopped shaking, but Vincent hadn't moved from where he'd positioned himself, still curved protectively around her. You could have been killed, she said quietly, once the car finally stopped. So could you. That's not the same thing. You're the head of this family. You're my wife, he said, before she could finish the sentence with whatever smaller word she'd been about to use. And that child is mine. I didn't do that to protect an heir, Lily. I did it because I couldn't survive losing either of you. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. The understanding, finally, that the man beside her hadn't thrown himself between her and the bullet to protect the Moretti bloodline. He'd done it because he loved her, and hadn't known how to say so until his body decided for him. While the Empire believed Vincent was simply reeling from one attack after another, he was quietly building something Ricardo never saw coming. He called it Operation Black Crown, and he trusted exactly 4 people with its existence. Over 2 weeks, Vincent's most loyal captains began leaking information. Carefully, deliberately, always slightly wrong. Fake shipment schedules routed through compromised channels. Fabricated financial transfers designed to look like desperate, secret reallocation of Moretti assets. False communications suggesting internal fractures, security weaknesses, captains ready to defect if the price was right. Every piece of false information was a hook, and one by one, the traitors inside his own organization began to bite, moving money toward accounts that didn't exist except as bait, contacting buyers for shipments that would never arrive, promising loyalty to men who were quietly documenting every single betrayal in real time. Ricardo didn't know it yet, but he was walking directly into a trap built by the same patience his own uncle had once used to choose Vincent's wife. 2 weeks after the ambush, Ricardo called an emergency meeting of his own. Captains he believed were his, in a warehouse he believed was secure, celebrating a victory he believed was real. Half, he announced, raising a glass, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. Half of Vincent's network now answers to me. His financial routes, his shipping contacts, even 2 of his own captains. The Empire is already mine. Vincent simply hasn't realized it yet. The men around him raised their glasses. Somewhere near the back of the room, one of them quietly lowered his phone after sending a short, coded message to a number Ricardo had no idea existed. In his own study, Vincent read the short message and allowed himself, for the first time in weeks, something close to a smile. Every account Ricardo believed he had personally seized was empty. Every captain he believed had defected was reporting directly to Vincent. Every shipment he believed he now controlled had never existed at all. Ricardo hadn't captured half the Moretti Empire. He had simply spent 2 weeks proudly building a very detailed map of his own destruction and handing it, piece by piece, straight into Vincent Moretti's waiting, patient hands. The morning after Ricardo's celebration, Vincent gave the order he'd been preparing for weeks. It took just 11 minutes. Across 4 cities, security teams moved simultaneously, a coordination so precise that later, even Vincent's own captains would admit they hadn't understood the full scope of the operation until it was already finished. 6 corrupt captains were arrested before their morning coffee had gone cold. Bank accounts tied to Ricardo's network froze mid-transaction, funds vanishing from screens as confused men stared at balances that no longer existed. 2 shipping companies, quietly controlled by Ricardo's allies, was seized under paperwork that had been prepared and waiting for months. A warehouse full of weapons, meant to arm a rebellion no one but Ricardo believed was still theirs to lead, was confiscated before sunrise. By the time the sun rose fully over the harbor, 3 of Ricardo's most reliable political contacts had stopped answering their phones entirely. A judge who'd owed Ricardo favors for years suddenly discovered he owed something far more urgent to a different family altogether. A senator's office released a statement about reassessing certain relationships without ever naming names because names, in this world, were rarely necessary. Ricardo learned about all of it within the same hour, standing in the warehouse he believed was secure, watching 4 of his own men receive calls that made their faces go pale in near-perfect unison. "Every phone in this building," Marcus said quietly, stepping through the door with 2 of Vincent's men behind him, "has been monitored since the day you first mentioned Operation Black Crown to anyone outside this room." Ricardo's expression didn't change immediately. It took him a long moment to understand what Marcus meant, that every plan, every whispered conversation, every proud announcement about controlling half the empire had been delivered directly into Vincent's hands in real time for weeks. Vincent himself arrived 20 minutes later, alone, without guards, moving the way he only ever entered a room when he already knew precisely how the conversation inside it would end. "You built nothing," Vincent said. "You simply borrowed my patience for a little while." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "This isn't finished." "No," Vincent agreed. "But it's about to be, and I'd like you to understand exactly what you actually accomplished before it is." He crossed the room slowly, the way he crossed every room that mattered. "The attack 3 months ago, the one that forced Lily and me into hiding for 2 days in the mountains. You planned that." Ricardo said nothing, which was answer enough. "You wanted me unstable, frightened, distracted by something you assumed would weaken me long enough for you to move against the family while I was too busy grieving what almost happened to notice." Vincent's voice stayed level, almost gentle. "You didn't account for one detail." "And what detail is that?" Ricardo said, though his voice had lost most of its confidence. "That night created my child. The silence that followed was different from every silence that had come before it in that warehouse." Ricardo's face shifted through something close to disbelief, as though the math had never once occurred to him, as though he had spent months orchestrating chaos without realizing chaos had quietly built the very thing he feared most. "You didn't destabilize me," Vincent continued. "You created the heir who will inherit everything you were trying to take. You spent 3 months protecting a pregnancy you engineered by accident, terrified of a child who exists entirely because of you." Ricardo's composure finally cracked, something raw and furious breaking through the careful smile he'd worn for months. That was never the plan." "No," Vincent said quietly. "It rarely is." While Vincent dismantled Ricardo's network piece by piece, Lily had quietly been doing something no army or arrest warrant could accomplish. Word had reached 3 rival families, Castellano, Rinaldi, and the smaller but influential Torres organization, that Ricardo was recruiting allies for a rebellion against Vincent. Rather than wait for Vincent to negotiate through threats and old debts, Lily had requested a single meeting with each family's matriarch, unarmed, unguarded except for one driver, carrying nothing but a willingness to listen. She didn't offer money, and she didn't offer favors either, though both would have been easy enough to promise. She offered honesty about the marriage, about the pregnancy, about a family constitution that made her unborn child the rightful heir whether Ricardo succeeded or not, about the kind of peace Vincent's father had once tried to build before fear became easier than trust. By the end of the week, All three families had quietly declined Ricardo's invitation to join him, not out of loyalty to Vincent, out of respect for the woman who'd asked them, simply, to choose kindness over war. Vincent didn't learn this until later that evening, and when he did, he understood, not for the first time, but, perhaps for the first time completely, that his wife had accomplished in a week what his family's violence had failed to accomplish in years. He was still holding that thought when his phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number, sent at 9:47 p.m. He opened it, standing in his study, the same room where a divorce had once nearly ended everything. The same desk where his father's journal still sat exactly where he'd left it days earlier. Its underlined sentence still visible even from across the room. The message contained no threats, no demands, nothing but a single photograph. Lily seated in a chair he didn't recognize in a room with no windows, her hands bound loosely in her lap and her eyes steady, unafraid, staring directly into whatever camera had taken the image. Even now, even here, she looked less like a woman being held against her will, and more like someone patiently waiting for whoever had taken her to realize their mistake. Beneath the photograph, one line of text. "Choose your empire, Vincent. Das. Oh." Vincent stared at the photograph for exactly as long as it took him to understand there was only one answer he had ever been going to give. "Trace it," he told Marcus, already moving toward the door. "Now, Vincent, I'm not negotiating for her life. I'm going to get her." He didn't call the council. He didn't summon a war room of captains and lawyers to debate strategy the way protocol demanded. He went alone, with Marcus and 4 men he trusted absolutely, because the man walking out of that estate wasn't the head of the Moretti Empire. He was a husband, and his wife was in danger. The trace led to an abandoned cathedral overlooking the harbor, its windows long broken, its bell tower stripped bare by decades of neglect. Ricardo had chosen it. Vincent understood the moment he saw it, because it was the one place in the city that belonged to no one. No family, no jurisdiction, no history that could be used against him. It was wrong about the history part. Vincent had prayed in that cathedral once, as a boy, beside a father who believed in very little except loyalty and the occasional necessity of fear. He knew every door, every collapsed pew, every place a man could hide, and every place he couldn't. Lily was bound to a chair near the altar when Vincent stepped through the side entrance, Ricardo pacing in front of her with a gun loose in his hand, more agitated than Vincent had ever seen him. "You came alone," Ricardo said. "Foolish. I came for my wife. She's the reason all of this happened. The reason I lost everything." Ricardo's voice cracked, unraveling in a way it never had during all his careful, patient scheming. "If she'd never existed, then I'd already be the man my father feared," Vincent said quietly. "You'd have gotten exactly what you wanted. An empire built on nothing but fear, with no one left inside it worth protecting." Ricardo raised the gun toward Lily. Vincent moved before the thought finished forming. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, throwing his body between the barrel and his wife exactly as he had once thrown himself in front of a bullet. Neither of them expected to survive. The shot cracked through the cathedral, echoing off broken stone, and for one unbearable second neither man moved. The bullet caught Vincent's shoulder, not his chest. He didn't fall. He closed a remaining distance and disarmed Ricardo with the same calm precision he brought to every negotiation that had ever mattered, pinning him against the cold marble floor as Marcus and the others finally reached the altar. "It's over," Vincent said, blood soaking through his sleeve, his voice never once losing its terrible calm. "It was over the moment you decided her life was worth less than your ambition." The family council convened 3 days later. Ricardo stood before the same elders who had once questioned Lily's loyalty, stripped of every title, every privilege, every claim to the name that had defined his entire life. "Ricardo Moretti," Salvatore said, the words heavier than Vincent had ever heard him speak, "is no longer welcome to carry this family's name. Effective immediately, he is exiled from this family, this city, and everything either was ever meant to protect." No one objected. No one, this time, needed convincing. Months later, the largest ballroom in the city filled with exactly the kind of crowd Vincent had once assembled to end a marriage. International business leaders, senators, judges, representatives from families who'd once wondered whether the Moretti Empire was weakening. They believed they'd come to witness a corporate succession announcement. Instead, Vincent walked onto the stage holding Lily's hand. The room that had once expected a divorce fell utterly silent as he reached into his jacket and withdrew the original divorce agreement, kept untouched for months, as a reminder of the mistake that had nearly cost him everything that mattered. Without a word, he tore it in half. Then again, until nothing remained but scattered pieces drifting to the floor exactly as they had the night this story began. The room erupted into applause before he even spoke. He knelt before Lily, one hand resting against the curve of her stomach, the other pressed flat over his own heart. "I thought my empire was built on fear," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "I was wrong. It survives because of the woman standing beside me." He rose and turned to face them all. "My wife, the true lady of House Moretti, the protector of this family's future." He paused. "And before this entire organization, under the Constitution my own father once helped write, our child is the rightful heir to everything we've built." The elders rose to their feet. The captains bowed their heads. Somewhere near the back, servants who had once worked quietly beside Lily wept without any attempt to hide it. The maid, who had entered that estate carrying nothing but cleaning supplies, left the stage as the woman who had reshaped its entire future. That night, in the same office where their marriage had nearly ended, Vincent placed the last surviving fragment of the divorce agreement into the fireplace and watched it curl into ash. The room was quiet except for the fire. The same fireplace where his father had once sat him down as a boy and told him without explaining why, that a man's strength was only ever as real as the people willing to stand beside him when it mattered. "I believe distance was the price of leadership," he said quietly. "You showed me it was only ever the price of fear." He slipped his old wedding ring back onto his finger, took her hand, and made her a quiet promise. Neither of them would ever need repeated. Neither she nor their child would ever stand alone again. From a housemate nobody noticed, to the woman who saved an entire empire, Vincent tore up the divorce papers that almost destroyed everything, and finally chose love over fear. Comment, Holmond, if this ending made you emotional. Follow for more stories like this. The next one drops soon.